All right. Today's title, it's in Greek. I never actually studied Greek, but I went to math class, so some of the letters are the same, pi, sigma. And then, of course, they have similar letters to what we have, so like the T is the same. So I think the title is Tis prose akalatheo moi. I have actually no idea, but that's what you guys get. All right, so the title is actually a quote from Jesus. I believe it's in the book of John. So before Jesus was crucified, he was talking to his disciples, and he talked to them. He said, one of you 12 are going to betray me. And then later he talks about how he's going to go away. And Peter says to him, Lord, can I go with you? And Peter makes this statement. He says, I would be willing to lay down my life for you. Now that sounds all good and well, except if you know the story, we know that when push came to shove, Peter did fight for a moment, but once he let go of what he was trusting in, once he let go of his control with the sword, he ran away just like everyone else. So not only did he run away, not only did he not lay down his life for Jesus, but when he was asked if he even knew Jesus, he denied 3 times, saying he had no idea who Jesus was. So when Jesus raises from the dead, he goes and he finds Peter and he asks him a question. He says, Peter, you have to go back to the original Greek version because there's 2 different words, and they use the same word for love, agape and phileo. He says to Peter, Peter, do you love me with agape love? Do you love me unconditionally, sacrificially? Do you love me more than yourself? Because that's what Peter had claimed. He said, Lord, I would lay down my life for you. And Peter says, Lord, you know that I love you with phileo love, a love, friendship. It's still a strong love, but it's not a love that says, I love you more than myself and I'd be willing to lay down my life. Now, Peter was acknowledging that, yes, I said I loved you enough till I die for you, but when push came to shove, I didn't. See, one day, Peter would one day die for Jesus, but he wasn't there yet. He didn't quite have that love for him just yet. And Jesus made sure he'd acknowledge that. But Peter denied him 3 times, so Jesus wasn't going to let him off the hook once. So he asked him again, Peter, do you love me with an unconditional love? Peter says, Lord, you know that my love for you is just a friendship. It's a brotherly love. And so he asked him a 3rd time, Peter, do you love me with just a brotherly love? And it says Peter was he was grieved because he asked him a 3rd time. He says, Lord, you know everything. You know that I only love you with a friendship love. He says, go feed my sheep. And then Jesus starts to give Peter a glimpse into the future and what Peter would suffer for the sake of Jesus. As you can imagine, this conversation the heat of the conversation is on Peter. And then John speaks up. He goes, he asks about the man who betrayed Jesus. And then Peter, he kind of says an ambiguous statement. He says, what about this man? Now it's questionable, was he talking about John or was he talking about Judas? Again, it's ambiguous, he didn't say. But it didn't seem to matter. Because Jesus said to him, he said this statement, Tis prose akalatheo moi, which is to say, what is that to thee? Follow thou me. What Jesus is saying is that, Peter, you're focused on something that doesn't matter. You're focused on things that factors that don't matter to you. What does it matter what I do with him? You just follow me. So today we're going to talk about what doesn't matter. The truth is, anyone can make a difference for God in this world by understanding what things do not matter. Rationale 1, it does not matter who you are. Let's think of Abraham. Abraham was a cool guy. Most of us know he's the father of God's chosen people. So God had chosen him. Not only did God choose him to be his descendants to be the chosen ones, but one of his descendants was Jesus. So God said, through your descendants, I will bless all nations. Those who bless you will be blessed. Those who curse you will be cursed. So Abraham was a big deal. So the question becomes, why did God choose Abraham? Was Abraham the most faithful person on the earth at that time? Because that's why he chose Noah, wasn't it? God looked on all the earth and he saw no one righteous except for Noah. I got my memory water. There's nothing magical about the water. It just gives me a second to remember what I was trying to think. So does rambling. So was Abraham like Noah? Was he the most righteous person on the earth? If you really study the story of Abraham, you'll see that he was an idol worshiper, or at least his family was. God chose an idol worshiper, a polytheist, to be a monotheist, the one to be the father of his chosen people. You can read in the book of Joshua, I believe it's Joshua chapter 26, it even talks about how Abraham, before God chose him, his family worshipped idols. You can even see later on down the road, Laban, his great nephew, he had idols, and Rachel, his great daughter-in-law, Jacob's wife, stole the idols. I don't think she stole them because she's like, I don't think these idols are good for daddy, so I'm just going to take them away. I'm pretty sure she was planning on keeping on the family tradition, the family religions. You see, Abraham wasn't a perfect person. Abraham wasn't even a faithful person to God when God chose him. See, God chose him and he made him a faithful person. God chose a polytheist and made him into a monotheist. And was there no one else better on the earth? Who knows the story of Melchizedek? Raise your hand. All right, we got a few people. Melchizedek was supposed to be the king of Salem, the high priest of the Most High God. So Abraham is actually a contemporary of Abraham. Abraham even saved his life. And Abraham had such respect for this guy, instead of expecting money from Melchizedek, the guy he just saved, he gave money to him, a tithe, an offering. And then he sought a blessing from Melchizedek. Anytime you look in Scripture and you see someone blessing another person, it's always someone who was more respected, like Abraham blessed Isaac. Isaac blessed Jacob instead of Esau, and Esau got really mad. Jacob blessed, I believe it was Manasseh instead of Ephraim, and Joseph got really mad. I mean, there's all these times where people were blessing. So Abraham reverenced Melchizedek above himself because he was the high priest of the Most High God. So there was other people in the world who were faithful to God other than Abraham. So why did God choose Abraham? Abraham was an idol worshiper. He wasn't necessarily faithful to God. God chose someone unfaithful and made him the most faithful and obedient person. Gideon. I used to love the story of Gideon. I mean, I guess I still do. But as a kid, I'm like, wow, I want to be like Gideon. Gideon's a warrior. But when you read the story of Gideon, you start to think, why would God choose Gideon? Did God choose him because he was faithful to God? Not only did his village worship the idol of Baal, but Gideon and his family were the caretakers of the idol. So his whole family were idol worshipers, or at least they took care of the idol. If they weren't, then it's for business. It's unfaithful. So it wasn't because he was faithful to God. Was it because he was a great warrior? If you look, you'll find Gideon was not trying to fight. He was hiding from the enemies. He was a coward. Was it because he was starting a rebellion? No, he was farming. And there's nothing wrong with farming. But God didn't choose him because he was a warrior. God didn't choose him because he was faithful. God didn't choose him because he was starting a rebellion. God chose a coward who had no ambitions for military and turned him into the warrior that Israel needed. Think of David. Was David the biggest and the strongest in all of Israel? Actually, the biggest person in all of Israel was King Saul, and King Saul was afraid of Goliath. God didn't choose David because he was the biggest and strongest. In fact, when the Philistines saw David, they looked at him and laughed. They said, this is just a boy, so we have to assume he's insignificant. Actually, when Samuel came to anoint a new king, he went to the house of Jesse, just like God had commanded. And Jesse didn't even bring David. Of all his sons, he didn't bring David. Why? Because he thought David was insignificant. David was not even significant to his own family. But God chose someone who was insignificant, someone who was small, and made him the greatest king in all of Israel. See, God doesn't choose the best. He chooses normal people. He chooses sometimes the worst, and he transforms them into the best. So it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you're at right now. God can use you, and he will make you into who you need to be. I remember when I was very young, I felt like God was calling me to be a pastor. Foreshadowing, right? No. But I had a problem. I was very, very shy. And pastors, they have to be confident. They have to lead. And I thought to myself, God, I can't do it. So it's not as though God chose me because he thought, well, Daniel's got life figured out. He's a real secure, confident person. I was insecure about my walk, okay? Anyone else have that problem walking in public? You're like, everyone's watching me. And then somehow you go, oh, I hope no one saw that. And what I really hated was my run. Now, I'm a very fast sprinter, but at a young age, I was very insecure about my run. And of course, my mom doesn't want to run, so she's like, Daniel, quick, go tell your brother. I'm like, and she's like, no, run. And I'm just like, I just want to go home. I was not confident. I was insecure about many, many things. But even at a young age, I understood that if God wanted me to be a pastor, he would give me the confidence that I needed. So you see, God doesn't choose people who are already the best. He chooses them, and then he makes them the best. I'm not saying I'm the best, but I mean, you guys can say that if you want. I don't mind. So it does not matter who you are, and it does not matter how many people are involved. Let's go back to the story of Gideon. So Gideon, you would think because he's a coward, right, that God would choose to give him an army that was great odds. Like they had more people in their army than their opponents. We know that when Gideon summoned the people, 32,000 people came. That's a pretty big number. You think, how many people did the enemies have? It said they couldn't count them, so obviously it was bigger. So 32,000 people came. But God looks at this army and says, if I let this army win, they're going to try and take credit. They're going to say, look at what we did. And God loves credit. He hates it when we take credit. And God's the only one that deserves the credit, by the way. So God looks at this army and says, it's too big. So he tells Gideon, tell the people, whoever is afraid, go home. 22,000 people went home. For the 10,000 remaining, if they weren't scared, I'll bet they were now. 22,000, more than two-thirds, went home because they were scared. Kind of like their leader. They were cowards. But God looks at this 10,000 that remain. He said, still too big. If I let this army win, they'll claim they did it. So God does it again. And by the end of God dwindling them down, there were only 300 people. I mean, these were not like the 300 Spartans you hear of in the story of Sparta. These were just 300 Israelites, 300 people who decided we need to fight for our homes. God brought a victory, not with a mega army, but with a small army. And sometimes we think because we're not a mega church, we can't make a difference. Truth is, if you're a mega church and you're not making a difference, be very scared, because maybe God's going to break you down until you're small, and then he'll use you, because he wants the credit, not the church. We have enough people here to make an impact in this world. In fact, we have more than enough people here to make an impact. God can use smaller numbers than we think. Story of Jonathan. I love the story of Jonathan. So Jonathan is the son of King Saul. He's also the best friend of King David. I don't think King David was in the picture yet. But Jonathan is with his father and 600 troops, so not a huge army. But they're camped, just kind of waiting for their leader, King Saul, to give the order to go on the suicide mission. Because from what I'm told, or from what I read in the scripture, in this particular passage, the enemy armies thought that the Israelites were insignificant. Their numbers were insignificant. They weren't scared of them. So I'm assuming that their army was huge. So Jonathan, instead of going to his father and saying, let's go attack, or just waiting for his father, he took the initiative and came to his armor bearer, just one person, and he said, I have to turn around, my eyesight got bad. I mean, it's always been bad, but still. And Jonathan said to the young man that would bear his armor, come, and let us go over unto the garrisons of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few. So what Jonathan is saying is, let's go take the initiative. Let's go into the enemy camp, just you and me and my armor bearer. And maybe, just maybe, God will join us. Because if he does, then we can win. Because God doesn't need many. He can do it with just a few. And they had less than a few. They had a couple. But I think all of us need someone like this armor bearer. When we're at the point in our life where we're like, we want to serve God, we need someone like this armor bearer who says, I don't see a problem with that. Let's go. So the armor bearer joins him, and there's no record that God ever visited Jonathan and said, go up and I'll be with you. Jonathan took it by faith. He saw that the enemies were coming, the enemies of the Lord, and he said, I can make a difference. I can make an impact. He went with his armor bearer. It was like a flip. His sign was like a flip of the coin. Either God's with him or they're not. And when he felt that God was with them, he said to his armor bearer, let's go. So they attacked, and it said they killed 20 people within the first half acre. And the enemies were in panic. They were yelling, they were screaming. They were so confused on what was going on. The ground began to shake. And when the Israelites heard the uproar of the Philistines, they said, what's going on? Who was making that impact over there? And King Saul says, who's missing? Who's the one doing this? And they said, Jonathan, your son. So Saul, he gathers the 600 of his men, and they attack. Jonathan started a battle cry. And when the 600 attacked, they found they were in confusion. The enemies were in confusion. They were killing themselves because they were so confused. They pushed the enemies back, and when they were on the run, other Israelites, people not among the 600 army, people who were hiding, they came out of hiding to join the battle. Jonathan, because he took the initiative, he started a battle cry in Israel. And ladies and gents, we can make an impact like that too. It only takes one person, and it helps to have a friend. But sometimes you won't have a friend. I mean, these men had friends, I'm sure. So these are the three mighty men of David. If you've heard these stories, you'll know that you either wanted to be their friends or you would hope that they didn't know you existed. Because one thing is for sure, you did not want to be their enemies. All right, if you will, go ahead and turn to 2 Samuel 23, verse 8 through 12. I mean, these are the stories you want to listen to while you're like working out. Like, yeah, I want to be a mighty man someday. Take some water while wait. All right, 2 Samuel chapter 23, we'll start in verse 8. These be the names of the mighty men whom David had, the Tachmonite that sat at the seat, chief among the captains. The same was Adonai, or Adono, not Adonai, it's different. The Ezonite. He lifted up his spear against 800 whom he slew at one time. This verse is saying that this guy killed 800 people with one spear in one battle. Now, of course, you can be saying, well, maybe it's kind of overgeneralizing it. Maybe it's saying him and his army killed 800 people. Yeah, you could say that if you want to really bum out the pressure, I guess. But let's keep reading. Verse 9. And after him was Eleazar, the son of Dodo, the Ahohite, one of the three mighty men with David. When they defied the Philistines that were there gathered together to battle, and the men of Israel were gone away. So they're saying the Philistines were coming. And when the children of Israel, they saw the Philistines, they saw the army, there was something about that army that they said, no, it's too big. We can't defeat them. Maybe they had too many people. Maybe they had better weapons. Maybe they had better armor. Whatever it was, the children of Israel were afraid and they ran away. And then pick up in verse 10. And he arose, this is Eleazar, and smote the Philistines until his hand was weary, and his hand clave unto the sword. And the Lord wrought a great victory that day, and the people returned after him only to spoil. What this tells me is the children of Israel had already run. The Bible said that. They ran away. But Eleazar stood his ground. I can only imagine when everyone is running from the enemies, and Eleazar has his sword in his hand, and he just attacks the enemies. It says he defeated them on his own. And he swung his sword so many times, so hard, that by the time the battle was done, his hands were stuck. He couldn't remove his hands from the sword. He fought for so long. And only then does it say the children of Israel came back. I'll bet Eleazar was fighting thinking, I sure hope my buddies come back. I'm getting kind of tired. My hand's feeling kind of stuck. But it wasn't until the battle was done that the children of Israel came back, and only so that they could loot the bodies of the dead. Eleazar, unlike Jonathan, he fought alone. Jonathan started a battle cry, and that's great. Hopefully, we can make impacts like Jonathan. But sometimes we have to be like Eleazar. We have to fight alone. We have to fight till we're tired. We have to fight until our hands are stuck on the sword. Sometimes we'll be alone. Let's keep reading in verse 11. And after him was Shammah, the son of Agi, the Hararite. And the Philistines were gathered together into a troop. There was a piece of ground full of lentils, and the people fled from the Philistines. Same basic story. The people look at the enemies, they say, wow, we can't do that. There are too many. There's too armored. I don't know what it was, but the people looked at the enemies and they ran away because they were afraid. In verse 12, but he stood in the midst of the ground and defended it and slew the Philistines, and the Lord wrought a great victory. Just like Eleazar, this guy, Shammah, he had to stand alone when everyone else was afraid. And we're not talking a small army. We're not talking like 20 people showed up. The people were afraid of this army. They ran away, but Shammah and Eleazar, both times, they stood their ground and they fought, even though no one else came to join them. But you know what? They weren't alone. Who was with them? God was with them. And if God is behind you, no one can stand before you. So, 3 mighty men. They are, like I said, it does not matter who you are, God can make you who you need to be. It doesn't matter how many people are involved, as long as God is involved, you'll win. And it does not matter how much resources you have. Think of David. Again, David was just a shepherd. He wasn't a king. He didn't have all these resources. But when he came to fight Goliath, Saul, who should have been the one to do it, he was afraid. And he gave David his armor. He said, here's my resources. Maybe this will help you. Maybe this will give you an advantage in the battle. So Saul tries to give David his armor. And David puts this armor on, which didn't fit him, by the way. Saul was a big dude. And David says, no, this is just going to slow me down. I don't need these resources. And sometimes we think we need a lot of resources. But the truth is, those resources can just slow us down. David said all he needed was God. All he went to the battle was with a rock and with a God behind him. And he smote and killed the Goliath, the giant. We don't need a lot of resources. David's story is he went from rags to riches. He came from having nothing and became the king of Israel. Moses has almost a complete opposite story. He went from riches to rags. Moses was a prince in Egypt. He had resources, he had power, he had influence. He had money, he had all these different resources, and he tried to help Israel. Do you know what happened? He failed. And you know what happened after that? He ran away because he was scared. When we find Moses next, he's a shepherd. Interesting thing about shepherds, Egyptians hated them. You can look in the book of Genesis. When Joseph's father and his family was coming, he said, don't tell Pharaoh you're shepherds. The Egyptians hate shepherds. Moses was educated as an Egyptian prince. He would have been taught to hate shepherds. So when we find him as a shepherd, we see that he was probably at the lowest point he could think of. But that's when God chose to use him. God doesn't need us to have a lot of resources. God is the creator of everything. He has all the resources we need. If Moses was able to free the Israelites with his influence as a prince, then we would say Moses was a good negotiator. But do we say Moses was a good negotiator now? No. We say God was the one who delivered Israel. God doesn't need us to have a bunch of resources. He just needs us to be willing to follow him. It does not matter if others doubt you. Think of Moses. My goodness, everyone doubted Moses. Every time something happened, no matter how much God had done through Moses, every time something happened, the people were crying, oh, you brought us out here to die. They were always doubting Moses. No matter what happened, as soon as something bad happened, complete doubt. The children of Israel were like a roller coaster of emotions. They were like, oh, we believe. No, we don't. We believe. No, we don't. Everyone seemed to doubt Moses. His family doubted Moses. Even Moses doubted Moses. When God came to him, he said, no, I can't do it. I don't speak well. Moses was actually one of my inspirations as a young person. I thought if God can give Moses the confidence to speak, he can give me the confidence to speak. I'm still terrified, but faith it till you make it, I've heard. It doesn't matter if people doubt you. They doubt Moses all the time, yet God still used Moses. What about Caleb and Joshua? The people doubted Caleb and Joshua. So when Moses, after they got out of the wilderness, he sent 12 spies into Israel to kind of get a feel for the land. All of them came back and said, the land is great, but the people are too big. Not all of them, actually. 10 of them said, the enemies are too strong. We can't defeat them. except for Caleb and Joshua. Caleb and Joshua said, no, if God is behind us, we can do it. Hold on, let me ramble for a second. No, I'm kidding. The people doubted. They said, no, we can't do this. The enemies are too big. You know what God did? Because the children of Israel, they weren't just doubting Moses. They weren't just doubting Caleb. They weren't just doubting Joshua. They were doubting God. After all that God had done for them, they doubted God. So God said, fine, I'm tired of this. You guys haven't learned your lesson. I'm going to send you back to the wilderness for 40 more years until all of you are basically dead, except for two, the one who believed God, Caleb and Joshua. Even Moses wasn't even allowed to go to the promised land. Did you know that once God made this decree, some of the people repented and said, no, we want to go to Israel. God said, I won't be with you. Some of them still tried to go, and they were slaughtered. The enemies were great. I mean, they weren't great. I mean, they were big. The enemies were terrible, but without God, the people stood no chance. Sometimes, or a lot of times, people who doubt, there's consequences to it. People even doubted Jesus. Why was Mary crying at the tomb? Was it because, gosh, I really wanted to be here for his resurrection. I was really hoping to greet him. She was crying because she thought someone stole his dead body. People always doubt. They even doubted Jesus. When Jesus came back, he popped into the room of the 12 disciples, or I guess 11 now. They all seemed surprised. Was Jesus like, did you guys not get my angel mail? I sent it like the other day. People, even though Jesus told them what was going to happen, people still doubted Jesus. So don't be worried if they doubt you. If they're going to doubt God, they'll definitely doubt you. It does not matter who you are. It does not matter how many people are involved. It does not matter how much resources you have. It does not matter if people doubt you. And it does not matter what environment you're in. You know, I've been told by missionaries there are certain mission fields that are tougher than others because of the certain environments. Like places in Europe, we've all kind of heard it. Europe, they're kind of hardened to the gospel. They think they're already good. They went to church on Easter that one time, so they're going to heaven somehow, because that's not really how it works. But there's certain fields that I've heard are tougher than others. And then some people, they complain, people in Catholicism, countries that are predominantly Catholic, they teach them not to read their Bible. They teach them just trust in the priest. They teach them, yes, Jesus saves you, but you also have to pray to Mary. You also have to pray to these people. You also have to do these certain things to get your way into heaven. So it's as though the Catholic Church, they're very close to the gospel, but they just miss it, and it's very unfortunate. So that's why I'm told it's very difficult to witness in predominantly Catholic churches, not churches. If it's a Catholic church, it's a very dominantly Catholic church, in a predominantly Catholic country. But I told that to Pastor Corey, one of the missionaries we support in Philippines, where we help support, and he laughed at me. He said, Daniel, you're standing in the most Catholic country in all of East Asia. It doesn't matter what environment you're in. This is a picture, it's a very dark picture, I should have lit that up a little bit. A picture of people in the Philippines, the most Catholic country in all of Southeast Asia, coming to the Lord. People who are accepting salvation. All of these people were Catholic at one point, and all of them here, or if they're not accepting salvation, then they're at least taking another step in spiritual growth. Some of them had already accepted, and they were asking to be discipled, or they were asking to be baptized. Whatever it was, these people were taking the next step spiritually. So it doesn't matter if the country is predominantly Catholic. And another thing, many of the volunteers, these weren't theological geniuses that were sharing the gospel. These were normal people. In fact, most of them probably had a 10th grade education. Some of them were high schoolers. They were younger than the campers. Some of the campers were like 40, so it was kind of strange at a high school camp. It doesn't matter who you are, God can still use you. Some of these people, they don't come from great Christian families that encourage them to go to church. Most of them come from families that are Catholic, and they say, I don't want you going to that church. I don't want you reading your Bible. You should be praying to Peter, not to Jesus. You shouldn't be praying to God, or I guess they still pray to God. Most of them are discouraged from their Christianity, but still, they witness to others. And some of them, they come from different backgrounds. Some of them, formerly they were homosexuals, or maybe they were transgenders. But once they got saved, they said, I know I was doing wrong. God saved me, and I want to tell others. So they gave up their homosexuality. They gave up transgenders. They went back to their what they should have been. And now they're trying to make an impact. Some of them are from prison. I had one guy, first guy I talked to at camp, he's telling me, he's like, yeah, I went to prison. I stabbed a guy a few times and shot him. Was in a coma for several months. And then another friend of his comes. He goes, hey, JD, this is my prison buddy. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, we were buddies in prison, yeah. That's not even a very good accent. It sounds like a Russian accent, yeah. But it doesn't matter who you are. God takes you where you are at, and he makes you who you need to be. And that's the story of most of these people here. Actually, all of those people there. Then, of course, there's countries where they don't even really know who Jesus is, like a Buddhist country. Well, they also had the opportunity to go to Cambodia. Here's a picture in Cambodia of one of their church camps. These are also people accepting salvations. A Buddhist country, people who believe in Buddha, they're turning around and saying, we understand that Jesus is the Savior. See, it doesn't matter what environment you're in. If God is at work, then his work will happen. I also heard a story, I won't give the name or the country for the safety, I guess, since this is posted online. It was a country that is predominantly Muslim. And Muslims, they don't really like Christianity too much. In fact, I was told in this specific country, someone, I think he was a politician, he wasn't a Christian necessarily, but there was a Christian who, she was Muslim at one point, then she became a Christian, and she was thrown in prison. And then this guy, he stood up for her. He said she was in prison unjustly. His bodyguard shot him and killed him. And instead of going to prison, his bodyguard was given an award. That's how much they hate Christianity in that country. I heard just recently, and I didn't go to this country, by the way, I would get shot. I kind of stand out, being black, you know. No, I'm kidding. I know, I'm the whitest person. In the Philippines, they made sure to remind me. But just like these countries, did you guys know 6,500 people in that Muslim country came to the Lord because of this man? 6,500 people in the month of March. That's more than in Cambodia, it's more than in the Philippines. 6,500 people in a country that hates Christianity. Ladies and gents, it doesn't matter the environment you're in. If God is at work, he'll make sure the work comes to pass. Anyone can make a difference for God in this world. How? By understanding what things don't matter. It does not matter who you are. God can make you who you need to be. It does not matter how many people are involved. God can use this church, God can use a mega church, or he can use just one person. It only takes one person to start a battle cry, just like Jonathan. Again, it helps to have a friend. I think we should all have a friend like Jonathan's friend or like Barnabas. It only takes one person. And sometimes it's going to be like that. Sometimes we're going to have people with the energy from God, and they're going to start a battle cry in our church. And maybe it'll start and turn into a revival in our whole country. But sometimes that's not going to happen. Sometimes you're going to have to be like Eleazar and Hama. You're going to have to fight alone. And you're going to get tired. Your hands are going to get weary. You're going to think maybe someone else is coming. But that may never happen. But I would encourage you, if God is fighting with you, whether anyone else is fighting with you, keep swinging. I'm not saying go kill someone, but keep fighting for God. If God is with you, if God stands behind you, then nothing can stand before you. It does not matter if others doubt you. They doubt. People are always going to doubt. Someone told me one time, if God was real, then he should have made himself better known. Like, really? Like coming down to earth? Yeah, that would have been helpful, wouldn't it? Jesus came down to earth. God became flesh, came down to earth, showed miracles, showed that he was more than human, but still the people doubted. It doesn't matter what we do. People are always going to doubt. And it does not matter what environment you're in. Whether you're in America, where probably the most Christian nation in all of the West, or if you're in a Muslim country, it doesn't matter. God can be with you. So this becomes the question, what are we going to do about this? We know God can help us. Jonathan even said, God doesn't need many people. He can do it with just a few. So which one of us is going to be the one to start the revival? Which one of us is going to be the one? Is it going to be our church that starts the revival in America? Does America need a revival right now? Yeah. Unfortunately, when I look in America, especially after coming back from some of those experiences in the other countries, I think, wow, I'd say America is all but dead spiritually. And it's sad. We're kind of like the army of Saul, the 600 people. We wait. We're waiting for the leader to make the change. We need to be like Jonathan. We need to take the initiative. And of course, there's wisdom. There's more than wisdom in waiting for God. But don't just sit on your butts. I don't mean that offensively. I mean, I guess everyone's sitting right now. Don't just sit and wait. Search. Search for where God is working. Think of Jonathan. Jonathan, let's go to the enemy camp and make a difference, and maybe God will join us. Jonathan was taking a risk. When's the last time we took a risk? No, the reason I went to the Philippines was not because I was looking for a place to serve God, because serving God here. I went to the Philippines because I heard of the success there, and I wanted to figure out what were they doing? What were they doing that was making such an impact in their country, and can we do it here? It didn't take me a week before I figured it out. They're trying. They're trying, they're failing, they're improving, they're succeeding. But above all, they're trying. They're taking risks. They're like, let's try this. Oh, that failed. Let's improve it and try it again. Unfortunately, most Americans are just sitting and waiting. We're not actually searching for what God wants us to do. We're just waiting for him to tell us what to do. And what would God have to do to tell us? Well, like, what are we expecting from God? Are we expecting him to verbally tell us, Matt, I want you to go to India? I don't think God has an Indian voice. I want you to go to India. I mean, maybe. I don't necessarily think, it doesn't matter. Like, if God spoke verbally to us, we wouldn't listen. We'd go to a psych ward, okay? What does God have to do to tell us to do something? Jesus came down to earth, and yet people still didn't listen. People were always going to doubt God's plan for them. I would encourage you, start going out. Start taking risks. Search for where God is at work and join him. And if you take risks, hopefully Jesus or God joins you. Ladies and gents, our church is big enough, more than big enough, to make an impact, not just in Cheney, not just in Kansas, but in the whole world, if we allow God to work with us.